You are standing on a frozen runway, breath turning white in the dark. It is December 1948, and the night wind cuts through your gloves as if they are paper. Somewhere beyond the perimeter lights, a city of more than 2 million people is going cold. The rule says this should not work. Every military planner you were trained by agrees on it. Air power cannot sustain a city, not for weeks, not for months, not through winter. Railways exist for a reason. Rivers exist for a reason. Roads exist for a reason. Aircraft are for men and bombs, not coal and bread. The enemy believes this rule as deeply as you do. In Moscow, staff officers look at maps of Germany and see inevitability. West Berlin is an island, 110 miles inside Soviet-controlled territory. No rail access, no highways, no canals. Every ground route has been cut. Coal stockpiles are counted in days, food in weeks, morale in hours. They do not need to fire a shot. The assumption is simple and absolute. An airlift of this scale is impossible. Cargo planes are fragile, weather grounds them. Maintenance cripples them, pilots break, engines fail, winter winds. The rule is so unshakable that the blockade is announced with calm certainty. Starve the city. Let politics finish the job. You feel that certainty pressing in as you walk toward your aircraft, a lumbering transport that strategists once dismissed as pointless in modern war. Slow, unarmed, vulnerable. Designed to haul crates, not change history. The rule says this plane cannot save a city. But in 1948, one winter, and the men who flew through it will shatter that belief. You are 28 years old, Lieutenant Gail Halvorson, born in Utah, raised on farms and discipline. You flew bombers in the war, but this assignment feels different. No flak bursts, no enemy fighters, just responsibility, raw and unfiltered. Your aircraft is a transport, its maximum load measured not in firepower, but in tons. Coal dust coats the cargo floor. The smell gets into your clothes, into your skin, into your lungs. It will not come out. Berlin matters more than any bomb target you ever saw. Strategically, it is the hinge of post-war Europe. Politically, it is a test. If the Western allies abandon the city, the message is clear. Pressure works. Encirclement works. Resistance is optional. The numbers are merciless. Berlin requires a minimum of 4,500 tons of supplies every single day just to survive. Food, medicine, fuel. In winter, coal alone demands more than half that total. One missed day compounds into catastrophe. At the start, Allied aircraft deliver less than half the requirement. Pilots fly narrow air corridors only 20 miles wide, stacked vertically like invisible highways. One corridor in, one corridor out. No turning back, no deviations. Miss your slot and you abort because another aircraft is already behind you, flying blind through cloud. The weather does not cooperate. Freezing fog rolls in without warning. Ice forms on wings. Engines cough. Runways vanish under snow. You are told this is a temporary measure, a stopgap, something to buy time. But every time you circle over Berlin, you see the same thing: dark buildings, children in oversized coats, smoke that barely rises because there is no fuel to burn. And you understand something others still avoid admitting. If this fails, the city falls without a fight. Tonight, as you climb into the cockpit, the impossible task stops being abstract. It is waiting on the ground. You advance the throttles. The engines roar, uneven at first, then steady. The aircraft shudders as it begins its takeoff roll. Snow blows across the runway in sheets, obliterating depth perception. You count seconds instead of distance. 5 seconds, 10, 15. At 18 seconds, the aircraft lifts, barely. The load is cold, just over 10 tons. It presses the aircraft down like an accusation. You feel every vibration through the control column. Climb rate is minimal. You hold it there. Any steeper and you stall. Any lower and you clip trees. You level at 5,000 feet, entering the corridor. Radio silence except for clipped calls. Altitude confirmations, spacing checks, warnings about icing layers ahead. Ice begins forming within minutes. You watch it creep along the wing's leading edge, translucent at first, then thickening. Performance bleeds away. You adjust mixture, carb heat on, eyes never stop moving. There is no room for error. Aircraft are spaced exactly 3 minutes apart. At cruising speed, that is less than 10 miles. Lose an engine and you cannot descend. You would collide with the aircraft below. Climb and you violate the stack above. You hold the line. Below, the ground is black. No lights, no landmarks. Only cloud and instruments. 30 minutes in, turbulence slams the aircraft. Cargo shifts. The control yoke jerks. You fight it back, jaw clenched, hands numb. This is not heroism, it is repetition. Every flight is the same and every flight is worse. On approach to Tempelhof, visibility drops to near zero. Ground-controlled radar vectors you down blindly. The runway appears at the last second, 2 rows of lights punching through the fog. You land hard, no flare, no finesse. Tires scream. Brakes shudder. The moment you stop, ground crews swarm the aircraft. Coal nets come out fast. They work by muscle memory, unloading in under 10 minutes. Engines stay running. You do not leave the cockpit. Another aircraft is already on final. You are airborne again within 12 minutes. This cycle repeats, hour after hour, day after day. By January, aircraft are landing in Berlin every 90 seconds. The enemy watches the numbers climb. They tell themselves it cannot last. But it does, and something unexpected happens. As you pass over the city on a clear day, you see children waving from the ruin. Not begging, just waving. You rock the wings in response. The next flight you drop small parachutes, handkerchiefs tied with candy. It is not in any plan, it is not strategic, it is human. The gesture spreads, morale lifts, stories circulate. Berlin listens for the sound of engines, not with dread, but hope. Behind the scenes, the tonnage rises. 3,000 tons a day, then 5,000, then more. In February, during the worst winter in decades, the airlift delivers over 8,000 tons in a single day. Coal dust coats everything. Engines wear out faster than they can be replaced. Pilots sleep in chairs. Accidents happen. Aircraft crash on approach. Crews die. And still, the flights continue, because stopping, even for a day, means the city freezes. This is where failure should finally arrive. Instead, the numbers keep climbing. If you find this kind of forgotten history as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of courage and sacrifice deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. You stop counting days. You count sorties. By February 1949, winter is no longer a season. It is an enemy that never retreats. Temperatures stay below freezing for weeks at a time. Snowbanks line the runways like walls. Engines refuse to start. Hydraulic fluid thickens. Metal contracts until bolts snap under stress. You fly anyway. Each mission begins the same way. Briefing, weather, load, weight, corridor slot. You already know most of it by heart. The variables barely matter anymore. You will take off if the runway exists. You will land if the instruments function. Everything else is noise. The aircraft are aging faster than planners predicted. Some are already past their recommended service hours. Maintenance crews work in the open, hands bare because gloves cost dexterity. They sleep less than you do. The air corridors are now saturated. At peak efficiency, one aircraft enters Berlin every 90 seconds, day and night. That is 40 aircraft per hour, nearly 1,000 per day. No pauses, no gaps. A single mistake cascades into catastrophe. You see it once, burned into memory. An aircraft ahead of you aborts late, too late. Its wing clips the runway lights. It skids. Fuel ignites. Fire blooms in the fog like a sunrise. The tower does not close the field. They cannot. You circle once, twice. Smoke drifts across the approach path. The controller's voice is calm, almost detached. You are cleared to land. You do. Wreckage still burns less than 1,000 feet from the runway. This is the margin you operate in now. Enemy intelligence watches closely. Reconnaissance reports confirm the impossible. The city is not starving. Power plants stay online. Public transport runs intermittently. Hospitals function. Civil unrest does not materialize. They expected riots by Christmas. Instead, by March, Berlin consumes more calories per capita than some regions outside the blockade. The pressure shifts inward. For you, the pressure is physical. Your hands crack and bleed from cold and coal dust. Your ears ring constantly from engine noise. Sleep comes in fragments, 20 minutes here, an hour there. Dreams are nothing but instrument panels and altimeter needles. You fly through whiteouts where the horizon ceases to exist, through icing layers so thick the aircraft shudders under the added weight, through crosswinds that try to slam you sideways into hangars. Once on approach, the airspeed drops suddenly. Ice has built faster than expected. Stall warning blares, the aircraft sinks. You push the nose down, sacrifice altitude for speed. The ground rushes up. 500 feet, 400, 300. The engines catch. Airspeed recovers. You pull back gently, heart pounding, breath shallow. You land shaking. No one comments. You are scheduled again in 6 hours. By April, the tonnage numbers become absurd. On April 16th, the airlift delivers 12,940 tons in a single day, nearly 3 times the minimum requirement. It is done without ceremony, without headlines, just entries on clipboards. The so-called pointless cargo plane proves something no doctrine ever allowed for. Endurance can be decisive. You feel it in the city. Berliners no longer watch the sky with desperation. They plan days ahead. Schools reopen. Factories restart limited production. Black markets shrink because supplies stabilize. Children still wave. You still rock the wings. Behind closed doors, the enemy debates quietly. The blockade has failed in its primary objective, but ending it outright is an admission of defeat. So they wait, hoping fatigue will succeed where pressure did not. Fatigue does not cooperate. Instead, efficiency improves. Ground crews shave minutes off unloading times. Pilots' perfect approach profiles. Maintenance schedules are rewritten on the fly. Aircraft types once thought unsuitable are pressed into service. Everything that can fly does. You are not fighting an enemy formation. You are fighting time itself. One night, weather closes in so tightly that landings stack up over Berlin. Aircraft circle, fuel ticking down. The corridor behind you remains full. There is nowhere to divert. Soviet-controlled airspace surrounds you. You calculate silently. Fuel remaining 22 minutes. Aircraft ahead 3. Estimated landing clearance 18. There is no room for error. The controller brings you down. Radar talked-on. Voice steady. You descend through cloud, trusting numbers more than sight. At 200 feet, the runway appears. You land with 6 minutes of fuel left. Another aircraft touches down behind you almost immediately. This happens hundreds of times across the winter. Not once does the airlift stop. Not once does Berlin go dark. And slowly, inexorably, the realization spreads beyond the cockpit. The rule was wrong. Airpower can sustain a city if you are willing to pay the price in exhaustion, machinery, and lives. The blockade ends not with a confrontation, but with silence. On May 12, 1949, the ground routes reopen. Trains roll. Trucks move. Barges float coal down canals that had been idle for nearly a year. You keep flying anyway. For months after, the airlift continues at reduced scale, insurance against reversal. Only when certainty replaces caution do the flights finally taper off. When you shut down the engines for the last time, the absence of noise feels unnatural. You have flown more hours in a year than most pilots fly in a lifetime. You step onto the tarmac, coal dust ingrained into every seam of your uniform, and realize something profound. The war did not hinge on a battle. It hinged on refusing to accept that something was impossible. You do not feel the impact immediately. No pilot does. From the cockpit, victory never arrives with banners. It arrives as a change in tone. The radio traffic shifts first. Enemy jamming stops. Interference fades. Reconnaissance flights pull back. The pressure that once felt constant begins to loosen, not because anyone admits defeat, but because the leverage is gone. What they did not know, What they could not admit even to themselves is that the airlift had already crossed the point of no return. By spring 1949, the blockade no longer threatens Berlin. It threatens its authors. The numbers tell the story with ruthless clarity. More than 277,000 flights, over 2.3 million tons of supplies delivered. Coal, food, medicine, machine parts, enough to keep a metropolis alive entirely from the air. Strategically, this changes everything. The assumption that pressure without combat could force political surrender collapses. Western planners internalize the lesson immediately. Logistics, not firepower, determine endurance. Supply becomes a weapon in itself. The enemy reacts quietly. Publicly, nothing changes. Privately, doctrines are rewritten. Air defense priorities shift. Future blockades are reconsidered, then abandoned altogether. Berlin becomes more than a city. It becomes proof. Proof that resolve, when paired with organization, can defy geography. Proof that morale is not an abstract concept. It is built from warmth, calories, light, and routine. You hear about it secondhand. Intelligence briefings mention unexpected civilian resilience. Analysts note failure to induce capitulation. Words chosen carefully to avoid the real conclusion. The airlift worked better than anyone imagined. Politically, the ripple spreads fast. Within months, alliances harden. Lines that were once theoretical become permanent. The idea of abandoning forward positions under pressure dies quietly, replaced by a doctrine of presence at any cost. For Berliners, the ripple is personal. The winter becomes a story they tell their children. The sound of engines overhead, once a reminder of war, transforms into a symbol of survival. Long after the flights end, people still look up when they hear aircraft. You visit the city later in civilian clothes. Someone recognizes you not by name, but by what you represent. A pilot, one of the airlift men. They shake your hand and say a single word you will never forget. Dank. You realize then that the true impact was never measured in tons. It was measured in trust. Trust that someone would come. Trust that the lights would stay on. Trust that endurance mattered. The blockade ends officially, but its consequences continue shaping the world long after the final aircraft departs. A city that should have fallen without a fight becomes a fixed point, a place where pressure failed. And every future crisis carries the echo of that winter. Could we supply it? Could we hold it? Could we endure? Because once the rule is broken, it stays broken. Years pass, but the winter never really leaves you. You return to ordinary service. New aircraft, new assignments. The world moves on faster than anyone expects. Yet whenever cold air hits your face, you remember Berlin. The smell of coal dust, the blind descents, the runways appearing out of fog at the last possible second. The men you flew with scatter across postings and careers. Some leave the service. Some never fully sleep through the night again. A few do not live long enough to tell their stories at all. Their names rarely appear in textbooks. They are mechanics who worked 20-hour days in sub-zero temperatures. Loadmasters who stood ankle-deep in coal slurry. Controllers who talked aircraft down through fog knowing a single miscalculation would kill hundreds. You think about ages. Most of you were in your 20s. A few barely 30. You were not senior planners. You did not set policy. You were handed an aircraft and a slot time and told implicitly that failure was not an option. And you made that true. Berlin grows, rebuilds, becomes a symbol again and again in different decades for different reasons. But beneath every later headline sits the same foundation. A winter when the city learned it would not be abandoned. The airlift enters doctrine. Logistics schools teach it. Commanders cite it as precedent. The phrase "sustaining by air" stops sounding theoretical and starts sounding proven. Yet doctrine strips away the human cost. It does not include the fear of ice-induced stalls at 200 feet. It does not include the funerals. It does not include the exhaustion so deep it becomes normal. That is why this story matters now. Because modern wars still hinge on supply. Cities are still pressured into submission. Experts still declare what cannot be done based on models and assumptions. And because once, not long ago, those assumptions were wrong. Lieutenant Gail Havorson lives long enough to see the airlift remembered not just as an operation, but as an act of moral resolve. He is asked about the candy drops more than the coal, and he understands why. Children remember kindness longer than logistics, but kindness alone did not save Berlin. Discipline did. Repetition did. Endurance did. Thousands of anonymous flights. Thousands of ordinary decisions made under extraordinary pressure. If even one day had been missed, history would look very different. So when you hear the phrase airlift, do not picture elegance or ease. Picture winter, picture fog, picture engines running while crews unload in the dark. Picture a city listening for aircraft and knowing it will live another day. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that LT Gail Havorson and the thousands of airlift crews who flew into Berlin do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.